Okay, hello YouTube. Today we're going to be looking at the English opening again. We're going to be taking a look at the Symmetrical English with c4, c5, and we're going to be trying to figure out what to do when our opponent plays for an early d4 by playing the move knight f3. So if you like content like this and you want to see more content like this, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button and click on your bell icon. That's your notification icon to be notified when I make more videos. So anyways, my recommendation is to play the move knight to f6 in anticipation of the move pawn to d4. And then after they play pawn to d4, you're going to play c takes d4, knight takes d4. And I actually recommend an opening called the Kasparov gambit, named after Garry Kasparov, who played this gambit quite extensively in his early chess career. This is before he became the world champion. And I actually have quite a few of his games right here that we're going to go over within this analysis. So the move is e5, and then after knight to b5, we're going to play the move pawn to d5. So this is, again, one of those really cool ways that you can try to get some type of advantage and some type of dynamic position out of the Symmetrical English when it seems like it's just a symmetrical opening and it's super boring. The Kasparov gambit is actually one of the reasons that I really enjoy playing the Symmetrical English myself, because the Kasparov gambit is really one of the more exciting gambits within the whole Symmetrical English. So after c takes d5, one of the things you have to remember is you cannot capture this pawn. That's why this is a gambit. If you were to play queen takes d5, they're going to have the immediate knight to c7 check, winning your queen. And if you play the question mark knight to d5, they are, of course, going to sacrifice their queen and go ahead and play knight c7, and after they capture your queen on d5, they're going to end up a whole piece to the good. So you certainly don't want to do that. So that's why after c takes d5, we're simply developing. We're going to play bishop to c5, and this is what makes it a gambit. You've gambited this pawn, but in exchange for that, you've gotten some really good traditional development. You've gotten your bishop to a nice long diagonal, and you've got your knight and bishop out kind of in the traditional way. So if you're an Italian player, for example, like if you play the Italian game with white, this is very similar to a lot of openings where you're going to play that early d4, like in the Max Lang attack or something similar. So after bishop to c5, also the Yurosov gambit, etc. So bishop c5, we have e3, and there was another game that didn't go e3. There were some games that went knight on 5 to c3. So there's a couple of options here. e3, and I would say knight on 5 to c3 are the two most common moves, just either pushing this pawn right away or retreating this knight to c3. So the easiest way for me to remember basically what the plans are is, let's take after e3 as an example. Your basic plan is, with black, is you're going to castle. At some point, you're going to push e4. At some point, you're going to play queen e7. And then you can usually get this pawn back eventually by harvesting it with knight on b to d7 and knight to b6, and possibly even this rook to d8. And a lot of times this bishop will go to f5 to support the pawn, but it can also, of course, go to the g4 square as well. So that's basically your plan. Now, if they play something weird or something different within that, like if they play a3 and b4, or they threaten to play a3 and b4, then we have to adjust our plan and we have to do something different. So, starting with this first variation, knight on 5 to c3. The game that I'm taking this from goes after castles, a3. This is actually Palatnik versus Kasparov. This is Sam Palatnik versus Kasparov. And I actually got an opportunity to talk to Sam about this game years ago. This game was actually played the year I was born. It was played in 1982. Of course, I talked to Palatnik about it sometime after this, because, of course, I was only just born in 1982. Unfortunately, I was very uncommunicative back then. I wasn't even a year old yet. So, Kasparov immediately played a5 in response to a3. Now, one of the things that Sam told me about this game was, at the time, a3 was kind of a new move. His idea was to expand really as early as possible with the move a3 and b4, which is typically something that white reserves for later. Usually white will end up expanding with a3 and b4 down the road. He was trying to expand a little bit quicker to make sure that he got those moves in. And it would have even possibly allowed him to play a move like e4 down the road. So there was actually a really big threat here. And the way Sam put it is basically Kasparov played a5 almost. He looked at it for a minute, assessed it, and then played a5 fairly quickly. And after the game, Sam asked Kasparov, he said, how could you play a5 so quickly? I mean, this move, it created a weak square on b5, to which Kasparov responded, I'm already down a pawn. What do I care about weak squares? So, so this just shows Kasparov's understanding of chess, and of course his understanding of chess even to this day. He has a very deep understanding of the game of chess, and he has a very deep understanding about what things actually matter in the game of chess. I think that's something that a lot of players and even strong players get bogged down with, is there's a lot of stuff going on in any given position. We have weak squares, weaknesses, etc. The challenge of being a good player is knowing how to value these things and knowing which one of these things are more important at any given point. So Kasparov was able to quickly assess the position and realize the most important thing was simply to prevent b4, and he went ahead and played a5. And then he just kind of continued with his normal plan. After e3, he played e4, he continued with queen e7, and just notice he's just putting his pieces on squares. So Sam sacrifices the pawn, he goes ahead and plays d6, he's just trying to gain a spot for his knight to go to in the future. So bishop d6, knight takes e4, just trying to get some material back. Making these exchanges. Note it's not really possible for Kasparov to play queen takes e4 because of queen takes d6, so Kasparov just continues with aggressive attacking chess. But here, Sam has managed to get that piece and hold on to it. He's managed to get that pawn and hold on to it, but in exchange for that, Kasparov has gotten a lot of development, and White's position is very awkward to finish his development. And this is, of course, the goal of the Kasparov gambit, is to make it very awkward for White to finish his development. And you'll see what happens from here. Black develops naturally and normally, and then, basically just goes right after White, just completely goes after White while the king is still in the middle of the board, taking full advantage. So a few more exchanges happen, but White never quite gets off the ground. His bishop ends up trapped. He does manage to get this bishop out, but the fact that this bishop is trapped is a bigger deal. So Kasparov goes after that bishop. He manages to win it, but now Sam has 3 pawns for the piece. The piece ended up being more important. So he manages to convert it into 2 pawns versus the piece, and then Kasparov was forced to resign once it Palatnik was forced to resign once it became clear that Kasparov was going to catch these pawns. So this was Sam Palatnik versus Garry Kasparov in 1982. So that's knight on 5 to c3, and that's basically the basic plan of the Kasparov gambit, where Black is intending to put his pieces. And Black will follow through with that plan after e3 as well. Typically, Black will castle, and then after, say, knight on 5 to c3 here, we're going to do pretty much the same thing. We're going to play e4. It's also possible to play bishop f5 here. This was played and ended in a draw between Metlakov and Guri in Sochi, Russia in 2017. That game kind of continued like this. So it is possible not to push e4 right away. You can play this way and then try to get your pawn back this way. And like I said, this did end up being a draw in that particular game. So Anish Guri gave this a shot in 2017 and managed to equalize with Black and get the half point. So the normal is to just kind of push pawn to e4, and this is my personal preference, gain that space, make it very difficult for White to finish his development on the queen side. So after bishop e2, we would continue with queen e7, and then there's 2 main moves here. There's just developing with knight d2, and there's also the move pawn to a3. And on pawn to a3, we're probably not going to bother with a5. I think the best move is just to go ahead and pile up on this d-pawn and get it back. We can play rook d4, and then if b4, we get to play kind of my favorite move. I get to pull my bishop back to d6, which is neat, because now I'm aiming everything kind of at this white king. So I've had a lot of good experiences with kingside attacks, especially on the lower levels, getting early kingside attacks and getting huge advantages against the white king. So in this case, it went bishop b2, a5, knight d2, a b4, rook a1, queen a1, and then we get our pawn back. And then after a few more moves, the position just kind of simplifies. but black ends up a pawn to the good. This wasn't quite enough to win for black in Michalewski versus Bologan in Malila in 2011. That game did eventually end in a draw, but the opening was certainly a success for black so far. He got the extra b pawn, which is a passed b pawn. White gets his pawn back right away. He plays bishop g7, f6, bishop h6, queen c5. I would say that black has an advantage here because that passed b pawn is really important, and the white bishop is a little out of play, but he wasn't able to turn this into a win. White was able to hold on and save the draw. So then the other option is, instead of a3, they can play the knight to d2 and just develop. And we have another Kasparov game from his early career here. This is Michalewski versus Kasparov in 1981. So that game went, again, with the normal plan. It went rook to d8. We had a3, and then we simply got our pawn back. We played knight to d5. Knight d5, rook d5, queen c2. And then we had bishop f5 holding that pawn, b4, bishop back to b6, bishop b2, knight just developed, and then Kasparov starts developing that really great kingside attack that I like to play for. He starts going after that kingside. So king h1, rook d6, the pieces just all kind of start transferring to the kingside, so white breaks in the middle, but unfortunately that leaves his position vulnerable in other places after rook d2. So rook d2, we have b5, we take, and now black is of course up a piece, but white has a very dangerous passed pawn on b7. So Kasparov just has to basically keep that pawn under wraps, and if he manages to eventually capture this pawn, he's going to be completely winning. So after rook fc1, queen b7, that should pretty much be a wrap, but white plays on for a little bit longer because there are still some threats that white can play for. So starting with queen e8, because obviously we can't play rook e8 because we have rook e8 would be mate, so that makes Kasparov play queen c8, but of course we still have queen c8, and we can't play rook c8 because rook c8 is mate, so that makes Kasparov play bishop d2, and now of course this rook can't abandon the back rank because white has his own back rank problems with rook d1, so we have h3, and then we have h6, both players making luft, and white's going to have to move his queen away. We're going to have takes, and now it's two rooks versus the queen, but black is the one with the more aggressive attacking position. So rook f2, queen c7, a6, rook f6 holding it, rook d8, rook d1 check. Black is going to be able to go after that king, and then after queen e4, black plays f5, and Michalewski goes ahead and resigns. The problem here is that after the queen moves, and we continue with, say, rook g2, so let's say we play something like queen b7, rook g2, queen g2, rook g2, king g2, this king and pawn endgame is completely lost. So after, say, g5, king here, even if we liquidate with e4, we're just going to end up with a very simple 2-on-1 over here. And this is a brain-dead position for black to go on and win. So anyways, this is how we play the Kasparov gambit with black against the early d4 move. And of course, this is one of the main reasons that I like to play the Symmetrical English with black, is because of this so-called Kasparov gambit. The only other thing that you would have to worry about is sometimes people will retreat this knight to knight c2. These positions are not only totally equal after d5, they are completely boring. You can actually just exchange queens. And after this queen position, if anybody's a little bit better here, it's probably black. But you will see this occasionally, and I would just say we'll just call this position slight edge black and call it a day. Black has a slightly better position in the middle and the slightly more active pieces. If, for example, e4, we could just follow with knight b4, where white doesn't even really want to exchange. It's just kind of an ugly position for white. But this is roundabouts equal, but black is slightly better. Anyways, I hope that you found this video helpful. I hope you learned something new about chess, and I hope that you can use some of these ideas in your own game, and you can play the Kasparov Gambit on your own and hopefully win games with it. Thank you very much for watching.